Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine War live update, a live stream, because everything is happening. This is the single most ill-advised live stream I have done because it is UK Friday night, 10:40. I've had the best part of a bottle of Pinot Noir and watched a film with the missus. Fairly, I didn't realize it was 11 years old. I thought it was just out. And I said to my missus, Liam Neeson is looking a lot younger there. It turns out it's 2014 film, non-stop. Really quite a good film. Liam Neeson films are, generally on IMDb, the rating is sort of 5.5. You watch them because you know what you're going to get. Like, let's just take back an hour and a half of an old man doing unrealistic things, but occasionally comes up with some really good films. Cold Pursuit is a good one. Non-stop, really good film. Liked it. But turns out it's 11 years old. Watch out with my missus. She's gone to bed. Boys are now watching it, and so I thought. And while I'd been watching it, I was like, "Holy crap, that's happened! Holy crap, that's happened! Holy crap, that's happened!" And I thought I better do a live stream, but I'm not not really in a good state to do a live stream. But there's just too much going on, so I have to talk about it. Apologies. A couple of things just to do a bit of taking care of bits and pieces. Saturday tomorrow, UK time, and normally my my output is somewhat dependent on whether my boys are playing football. Both of their games have been cancelled. And so therefore I'm like, oh, okay. And I just found out that. So that's good. I can do my first video tomorrow morning. But I have, for some of you that know, I had a prostate biopsy recently, and they sent me a letter and said, you got to come in and speak to us at the hospital on Saturday morning, because that's cool. So I'm going into the hospital tomorrow morning to talk about my biopsy. So I presume I've got prostate cancer, but it's not a problem. These things are easily sorted out with regard to that. But I did a video on that previously. You can go and check that out if you want a weird off-piste video about my experiences. And it linked to Ukraine because one of the urologists who was picking up the back passage was in fact Ukrainian. And so there we were talking about my YouTube channel whilst things were going on, and there was much rummaging. Anyway, so that's happening tomorrow, which might well put out some of my content to a later time. Anyway, so fingers crossed that goes okay, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be bad news, but it's just the scale of bad news, and then it doesn't really matter because they should be able to sort it out, so it's nothing to worry about. Anyway, point is that, my goodness, wow, today has been nuts. Okay, so first of all, we know Andriy Yermak, and I did a breaking news update on a bunch of these things, but Andriy Yermak has been given a boot, or he's resigned, but he is super important for Zelenskyy. And so on the one hand, this is an opportunity to give Zelenskyy a bit of a fresh start, kind of like, let's lance the boil of corruption. We can be seen to publicly exercise the corruption from the government. And so that can be seen as a positive thing, but it's going to be jumped on by the Russians as a real negative. And then there are going to be people in particularly the United States and naysayers in Europe that, Viktor Orban, etc., they'll be jumping on this saying, look at the corruption involved with the Ukrainian government. This is an absolute shocker. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Zelenskyy and the team play it, the team as in, the administration. But also, there has been talk that the latest in terms of the negotiations between Ukraine and the US have been kept private from the EU, from the European allies. And so something weird is going on there. And then we also understand that apparently the Trump administration has taken a plan back to Putin that Ukrainian territory should be given up. So there's all sorts of potential terrible outcomes coming from the negotiations that are taking place. And it, again, things will emerge over the next couple of days, but it's looking like the United States is not going to be a good friend of Ukraine. All the while, tonight, a whole bunch of things have been happening, and the latest looks like Ukraine could be having another night of big attacks into Russian territory, but also the Russians have things like ships with Caliber cruise missiles out in the Black Sea, and there are some rumors that Russia is going to send a whole bunch of stuff towards Ukraine. So it could be a game of drone ping pong between the two nations. That's to belittle the very serious nature of huge destructive forces flying into each of these countries' airspaces. Vigo, good to have you on board, Vigo, by the way. He says, ATP Geo, you mean that the most corrupt players in the entire world will denigrate Ukraine for attempting to get rid of corruption by claiming it's too corrupt? Yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself. Yeah, well said, my friend. Yeah, but I mean, we are, as supporters of Ukraine, we are going to want to interpret the Andriy Yermak situation as positively as possible. We need to check our own biases, make sure we're on top of our own feelings, so that we are being as rational as possible. Like, irrespective of what you and I think, this is going to go down in a way that's damaging to Ukraine, no matter what. This is not good for Ukraine. Obviously, it's not going to be positive that the 2IC, the second in command, effectively is potentially involved in a corruption scheme. So it's just not good. How they play it is going to be super important. Now, Sviridenko, who is the prime minister now, is touted as one of the people that could take over as his 2IC. I think that'd be a good choice. You've got a female in charge, so that could add an interesting dimension. Not in charge, but with Zelenskyy. I just think that Yermak did so much for Zelenskyy that I wonder whether a big hole will be generated. That, but as I said in my breaking news video, like Yermak either drives Zelenskyy or supports him that much that him not being there will leave Zelenskyy kind of not rudderless, but like he knows what direction Ukraine needs to go in. He's got a very strong moral compass, Zelenskyy, but there's obviously an awful lot of heavy lifting that Yermak has been doing for the last 4 years. And without Yermak, I think Zelenskyy will I don't know if he will struggle, but he will certainly miss Yermak, no matter how divisive Yermak has been internationally and in his position. It will be a sore loss to Zelenskyy personally, and I think that is something that needs to be understood. Anyway, let's now go on to look at what has been going on over the course of the last 4 hours. Crazy stuff. We're going to start with tankers in the Black Sea, and I'm going to have some tea because, quite frankly, I need it. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. I was thinking about what drink I should have, and it's like, it's definitely got to be a cup of tea. Okay, so Tendar here says a second oil tanker. Whoa, a second? Basically, 2 oil tankers have gone up in flames in the Black Sea. And this itself warrants an entire video alone of just like talking about the ramifications of this, because this is entirely controversial. You can see this in a number of different ways, but it's controversial. I think it's a pretty neutral way of putting it. So 2 ships have been hit by something. The Kairos and the Virat. The destination of both oilers is the Russian port of Novorossiysk. So first of all, you've got 2 burning oil tankers in the middle of the Black Sea. Now, the good news of this is that they appear to be going towards Novorossiysk, which is an oil loading port. The implication would be that these are empty oil tankers, and fingers crossed these are empty oil tankers, because otherwise, aside from anything else, we have an environmental disaster on our hands. So one would hope that these are empty oil tankers on the way to be filled up. So it says here, Tendar says, shortly after crossing the Bosphorus north of Istanbul, they were struck by USVs. Both ships are totally engulfed in fires and abandoned by the crews. It's only a question of time until they sink. It appears that Ukraine has declared open season on Russia's Shadow Fleet oilers. Now, that's what Tendar said here. I've heard that one hit a mine, although that's pretty coincidental that it hit a mine at the same time as, pretty much exactly the same time as another hit, apparently, or was attacked by 5 Marine drones. So either we have one hitting a mine, one was hit by drones, or possibly both being attacked by USVs, unmanned surface vehicles. Now, the issue here is that this is evidently would be purposeful by the Ukrainians. They are attacking like non-Russian flagged ships, okay, Shadow Fleet, etc., but this is an attack on cargo ships of one variety or another. Yes, Shadow oil tankers, but this isn't the same as attacking like Russian territory, Russian refineries, Russian this, Russian that. This is a bit of a gray area, and it could be seen as fairly controversial, not least by Turkey being the neighboring nation there, but also whoever flags these ships. I think one of them was flagged in Gabon, maybe, or something like that. But this is a risky thing for Ukraine to be doing, and the imagery coming out of here is pretty incredible. You have some seriously burning hulks here. 2 Russian Shadow Fleet tankers caught fire in the Black Sea off Turkey after explosions, with all 25 crew evacuated from Kairos, heading to Novorossiysk, and 20 safe aboard Virat, struck 35 miles offshore. Turkish Transport Ministry reported, no, not Gabon, Gambia flagged tanker heading to Novorossiysk mysteriously caught fire after, quote, external impact in the Black Sea, with Russian media carefully avoiding specifics about what exactly impacted. Istanbul, November 28th, RIA Novosti. So Russian state media says a tanker caught fire in the Black Sea off the coast of Turkey. Due to external impact, crew evacuation is being prepared. The Turkish Maritime Authority reported on Friday, quote, a report was received that a fire broke out on the empty tanker Kairos. So empty tanker, good news there, en route to Novorossiysk, located 28 miles off the Turkish coast as a result of external impact. The condition of 25 crew members is normal, the authority said in a press release. The Gambia flag tanker is currently in the Black Sea. Rescuers are heading to the vessel to evacuate the crew, etc. Anton Gerashenko says Reuters is reporting 2 Russian Shadow Fleet tankers had explosions near the Bosphorus Strait that caused explosions causing explosions. Kairos had an explosion and caught fire while en route from Egypt to the Russian port of Novorossiysk. Virat had an explosion further east in the Black Sea, with heavy smoke coming from the engine room. So probably a lot more detail to be coming out about this. And indeed, here we have some imagery coming from on board. Crew from the tanker Virat reported an attack by approximately 5 marine drones, and that's according to War Translated, with reference to here some imagery from on board the vessel. While Kairos reportedly struck a mine, as 2 Russian Shadow Fleet vessels caught fire in the Black Sea off Turkey, with all crew evacuated safely, Turkish media reported. So, yeah, I mean, those are the claims. They might not be the truth at the moment. These claims will be emerging. But it appears you've got 2 ships fundamentally not in a good way, and these are not military ships. these are commercial vessels, but they are part of the Russian Shadow Fleet, and the Shadow Fleet is responsible for funding the war effort. And so in a sense, this is no different from striking an oil refinery in Russia, except there are senses in which it is different, because who actually owns these. If they're flagged by, for example, if one of these ships is flagged by Gambia and that ship was attacked by the Ukrainians, who owns the ship, and is that within the laws of war, morally and legally acceptable, etc., etc. So there are lots of questions to be answered here. Is this a sensible thing for Ukraine to be doing? I'm not sure, personally. Like, I understand you would need to stop Russia from making money off the war and therefore prosecuting the war against Ukraine. But I think you're starting to enter something of a grey area here. But of course, is this true? Did this happen? Who did it? Etc. etc. There are still many questions to be answered. I mean, some of the footage here is pretty extraordinary. Anton Gerashenko again says, reportedly, this is one more photo of the burning Russian Shadow Fleet tanker in the Black Sea. I don't know which one, but one of them is, yeah, I mean, that tanker's probably not doing a lot of tanking in the next week or so, one would think. So yeah, I don't know. And yeah, if one of them is hit by a mine, the question is obviously, is it a Russian mine? And probably would be. I don't think the Ukrainians have been throwing a bunch of mines into the Black Sea, but I'm not 100% sure of that. I would intuitively think the mines have been Russian mines, and therefore that is, not a problem for the Ukrainians. But if there are 5 USVs striking a vessel, then obviously that is a slightly different issue. But so, I mean, Paul Campbell here has a good point. Like, Russia has no problems attacking every ship going to Odessa. But here's the issue. Like, Ukraine, unfortunately, the reality of this war is that Russia gets to operate in the context of this war asymmetrically. So Russia can break the rules, and they've done that, and they've done that so much that it's been normalized and it's now expected. And in fact, no one holds Russia to as much account as is warranted by point of fact that they've apparently committed something like 180,000 war crimes, right? But if Ukraine starts committing war crimes, you have the two quoque fallacy in motion here, which is this fallacy that in philosophy you say tu quoque, meaning you too. So I've said this to you many times before, but there'll be plenty of people on this live stream that have not heard this. So the tu quoque fallacy would be like, for example, if you had murdered someone, like you're watching this, whatever your name is, Jim, you've murdered someone, and JP, I come up to you and say, you murdered that person over there. You murdered them. You bastard. You morally evil bastard. You murdered that person. And then you say back to me, but hang on, JP, I know that you've murdered 4 people. So you can't come to me and say how bad it is that I've murdered this person. You've murdered 4 people. That interaction is the you too fallacy, which is to say that, yeah, but you've murdered someone too. But you saying that to me does not morally justify you murdering someone else over there. The fact that I've murdered someone and I'm accusing you of murdering someone, and I'm accusing you of being a bad moral person for murdering someone, is not negated by me murdering other people over here. What that is hypocrisy. But hypocrisy doesn't morally justify. And it's really important to understand this. In the context of the war in Ukraine, Ukraine can't go around committing war crimes and saying, well, we can do it because they are doing it. I mean, they can do that, and you can maybe generate some kind of justification for that, but it won't be particularly strong. And the problem for Ukraine is they are always appealing to other nations, third-party nations, to support them because they have the moral high ground. So the EU, so an example today is that unfortunately, this is horrible news. But if you didn't know, a Czech foundation, I think Gift for Putin it's called, is this foundation, a charity that has been raising money from the Czech Republic for Ukraine. They've bought various things previously, including, I think, artillery ammunition. And this time they raised enough money, 500,000 euros in like a day or two, for Ukraine to buy a Flamingo missile. Firepoint, the manufacturers of the FP5 missile, said, you did such a good job with that, we are going to throw in another missile, 2 for the price of 1. Now today, due to the controversies regarding the Energoatom scandal and Andriy Yermak being investigated, Gift for Putin, the Czech foundation, has withdrawn the money for they've basically cancelled the gift of an FP5 missile, which shows you that what Ukraine does, morally speaking, affects how much people support them. So although Russia is happy to strike buildings and blow up children and families and strike ships in Odessa, as Paul Campbell rightly points out, Russia has no problems attacking every ship in Odessa. Yeah. But if Ukraine was to do that, they will lose support. End of. It's just human nature. You can't. So lex talionis, which is a kind of legal term, a biblical legal term that actually existed before the Bible in the Hammurabi Code, for example. So to get a bit geeky with you, people look at the Bible and think, oh, what a wonderful moral code. Actually, it's hugely problematic. But a lot of the moral code from the Bible is based on the ancient Near East and moral codes that existed in Mesopotamia, Sumeria, and these other places, such as the Uru-Nammu and the Code of Hammurabi, so on and so forth. These other moral codes that fed into the Bible, the Covenant Code and the Decalogue, and all these kind of moral codes that you see in the Bible, right? And one of them is the lex talionis, which is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, some people find retributively, intuitively, like makes sense. Like, you did that, so I can do that back to you. And the Bible literally says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That is lex talionis. But it actually is morally quite problematic, which is to say that you've murdered someone, therefore you murdered someone from my family, therefore I can murder someone from your family. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. In modern legal frameworks, that is thoroughly problematic. You just can't do that. That kind of retribution and that kind of vindictive, almost what's the term? My MS head is just probably the best part of a bottle of wine. Anyway, when you take things into your own hands as a vigilante, that kind of vigilantism is seen as morally unacceptable these days. So you can't start having this situation where Ukraine can start. I mean, you can have it, but they will lose support from international assisters and nations, allied nations. So they can't. Well, it is very, very, I think, risky for them to go and start doing things like this, unless you can show that these boats really are Russian boats. And if they're Russian, or ships, if these are Russian ships that are acting on behalf of Russia, they're owned by Russia, and that, there is no difference between these ships and an oil refinery, then it's all kosher. But if these are Gambian flagged ships, for example, and they are owned by third parties, and Turkey starts getting pissed, this is just a high risk strategy. Anyway, I'd be interested to see what you guys think, although I can't really read what you're thinking because I am just sounding off. Although I think Benny Pie is in the background looking at some of the comments, so I'll be interested to see if he's selected any for me. Let's just see. Actually, before we go on, let's go to what Benny Pie has has pulled up. Just a few thanks first. Niels Clement, thank you very much for gifting 10 ATP Geopolitics memberships. That's really super kind, mate. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Matthias Meyer gifting an ATP Geopolitics membership as well. Thank you, mate. Really appreciated. Right, Levko Koval, and thanks again, mate. You were on fire the other night. Hello, JP. I'm curious to hear your opinion on Russia's push for the peace plan. Could it be driven by actual operational exhaustion or just taking advantage of the moment scandal? The answer is yes. Always, if someone, I mean, this is kind of a rule of life, isn't it? If anyone wants to do something, it's usually in their best interest to do it. So if Russia wants, I've said this, every analyst has said this since the beginning of the war. If Russia is pushing for peace, it's because they're not in a great position, and therefore, I mean, this is the whole idea of peace through strength. So if you show your strength and you force Russia to the table, it's because you are stronger than Russia, and Russia is being beaten to come to the table and saying, right, okay, we're freaking desperate. We'll do peace now. So if Russia is, there are two theories here, as Levko points out. Like it can either be that Russia wants peace because they are weak and it's now or never, and actually, if we wait and wait and wait, we're going to be in a worse situation now, and therefore, if we are predicting continual degradation, then we need to get peace now to get the most out of this than we possibly can. I don't know that Russia is that self-aware. I think there is this sense that Russia is feels that they are kings of the world. They have this sense of arrogance, I think, that means that it could be the other thesis, which would be that they sense weakness in both Ukraine on the battlefield, whether that's accurate or not, because we know that Russia doesn't really have a good grip on what's going on the front lines, or at least the hierarchy, the military and political hierarchy at the top doesn't have an accurate picture of what's going on the battlefield, I don't think. And so therefore they might think we're doing really well, and Ukraine are weak. They're going through a massive scandal. They are militarily weak. They're politically weak, and the US is weak. Epstein files, that scandal's going on. Donald Trump has got the lowest polls going. He's in all sorts of trouble. He's not looking good. This is the time to strike in terms of trying to get the best deal we possibly can, and having the US on our side to try and drive that deal home to Ukraine and actually to Europe. So two different theories here, that either Russia is weak and they're like, we need to do peace now. Let's do it now. We're exhausted. Actually, we understand how weak we are. I mean, that is plausible, but I don't know that that's the Russian mindset. Or it's like everyone else is weak, and we might understand that we're not super strong, but we are stronger. But actually, it's more important that everyone else is weaker, and that's the time to demand the maximalist objectives from everyone else. So it's a great question, and I think both of those ideas are plausible. But it's more likely that they sense a weakness in everyone else. I hope I made sense. I do doubt that I'm making much sense at the moment. Okay, Sularok says, could there have been a better time to uncover corruption? There certainly could have been a worse. There are some people that are saying that this corruption scandal is highly coincidental, highly convenient that it's happening now. There's this idea that, do you know what? I don't think that. I think it's too unrealistic to believe that this scandal could have erupted right now at a time of the aforementioned weaknesses. Yeah, that's perfectly plausible. I just don't know. I'm not one for conspiracy theories, but Russia are very much capable of doing all sorts of underhand things, and it could be that this corruption has been uncovered by Russia, or indeed the United States, or any, you can generate these plausible explanations of why this happened. Or it could be that NABU and SAPO, the two anti-corruption agencies, have actually just been doing their job, and it's the natural conclusion to the investigations that they followed, and they have gone, I think I slightly favor that explanation. I think it probably is that they've just looked at who is involved in this, and it's worth them investigating. Andriy Yermak, he appears to be known as a person with a call sign or the name of Ali Baba, as has been mentioned, and it could well be that he's involved. The hope is that Zelenskyy isn't involved, because if Zelenskyy is involved, then that's an absolute disaster for Ukraine. Right, Stephen Bandal says the alarm is going off in Kyiv. I imagine that Ukraine is going to take one hell of a pasting tonight. That's just my thought. Cheryl, right, Cheryl, childhood friend, literally saved his life in the first days of the invasion when the Russians were at the door. I don't know what you're talking about there, Cheryl. But yes, if you, I don't know if Benny Pie can get me some details on what you're saying there. 8:07 a.m. Breakthrough says maybe it's time for Europe to face the music and file for divorce from the US. Or as we say in Switzerland, lieber ein Ende mit Schrecken als eine Schrecken ohne Ende. Or something. Yes, I've been talking about this an awful lot over the last few weeks, and that is the idea that the US still has a hold over Ukraine and still provides enough meaningful aid in terms of intelligence, satellite imagery, whatever it is, that Ukraine can't do without. And if Europe divorces from the US, then Ukraine doesn't get that stuff. And then the next step, the worst iteration of that, is that if the US then says, well, screw you guys, if you're divorcing from us, well, then we're going to join the other side. And if they then start actively doing things that are beneficial for Russia and against Ukraine, such as like turning off Starlink, you can imagine a situation where Trump just turns around to Elon Musk and says, mate, these Ukrainians have pissed me off, these Europeans have pissed me off, Elon, can you turn off Starlink? Elon Musk turns off Starlink, and Ukraine are freaking screwed. That one thing will have a huge impact. So yeah, I want Europe to stand up on their own 2 feet and say, screw you, Trump, we don't need you. But I also understand the brutal reality that if they do that, the US can really mess things up. Anyway, War of 1812, thank you very much for your generosity as well. Really, really appreciate that, mate. Thank you. Always such a kind supporter. Okay, let's go now back to some of the news coming out. And we have it's not as big as last night, but there looks to be another fairly active night for Russia. We have said that possibly Ukraine is going to have a heavy night of drones and missiles. There are ships in the Black Sea, Russian ships that carry, as one ship that we know that's out there that carries 6 caliber cruise missiles that appears to be readying itself to attack Ukraine. So yeah, there's a worry for Ukraine that they could have a really heavy night. And as Stephen Bendal says, Kiev air alarms are going off, and it looks like there will be attacks there. But I mean, goodness me, like Crimea, we're going to come back to Crimea in a second. It is taking one hell of a beating, to quote the Norwegian football commentator, when Norway unfortunately beat England in a football match. Winston Churchill, and he famously named all these like big British icons. You took one hell of a beating. Absolutely brilliant. Anyway, to move on, A fire has broken out at the battery warehouse at the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Tatarstan, in Russia, the same site known for producing Shahed drones. Now, this is very significant. You know how much I've been banging on about how Yelabuga should be absolutely freaking blitzed. Well, tonight, I mean, Jason J. Smart, who is a bit more prone to cheerleading for Ukraine, says in Russia's Alabuga in Tatarstan, the plant that assembles Shahed drones to strike Ukraine was hit by Ukrainian drones. The Kremlin's war machine is now burning on Russian soil. Now, you can see here there are two very different explanations of what is burning here. One says a battery warehouse at the economic zone, a site that prepares or produces Shahed drones, and Jason J. Smart says, you know, this is the plant that assembles Shahed drones. But if it's a battery site, I mean, either way, like this to me is like music to my eyes. If my eyes could see music rather than hear it. So I think this is really good news. If they can do this in Alabuga, it means they can get through, and therefore it's all about scale. Every night, I honestly, I am this sad. I am this much of a sad human being that virtually every night I go to bed and start imagining these scenarios like, well, what if they had like 25 point FP5s, 20 flamingos? Okay, they just stockpiled 20 flamingos. Would you think like 50 FP1s and maybe some Luti drones, maybe 20 Luti drones? Like, surely they can make that many and fight. If they could really think about it, they could fight in one night like 70 drones and I don't know, 20 FP5s, and it's just all at that one establishment. Surely they could do that. That's how I count sheep when I go to sleep at night, because yeah, that's what I dream of. Now, Paul Campbell says, Jonathan, your dream came true. Ukraine hit the factory that produces GPS receivers used in all Russian drones and missiles. I think Ukraine is genuinely working at some really strategic targets at the moment. And like last night, we didn't get a real handle on everything that was at least targeted. We don't know whether it's hit or not, but I think that's the same for the past probably 6 months. I'm hoping, and this could be copium, it could be hopium, but the best case scenario is that there will be a cumulative effect that will really hurt Russia. That every night Ukraine is hitting something significant that we don't know about, and eventually Russia's like, oh freaking hell, do you know, we're really struggling to make this stuff now. We're really struggling to fire this stuff, and I just hope that's the case. Now, Kazan. Now, I have to say, Kharkiv looked like this as well. So there's a video. I don't have it lined up, but Kharkiv, big electrical explosion over Kharkiv as the second biggest city of Ukraine, and big power cut in the video that I saw. So similar situation. So don't just think this is all one way and that I'm just cheerleading for Ukraine here. Russia, I think, is hitting Ukraine tonight big time as well. But Kazan, it looks like there's a big power cut that's taken place there. And this is one of the things that I'm most upbeat about at the moment. And this is why I'm saying that, do you know what? I had to do a live tonight because there's just so much shite that's happening tonight. It's just today. It's all going on. I mean, from Yermak to burning oil tankers to Yelabuga blowing up, maybe, but at least maybe part of it, maybe. And then stuff like this. These are FP2 drones, I believe, continuing to do their stuff. This is yet another video of FP2 drones taking out, as it says here, Ukrainian Navy and Special Operations Forces conducted a successful operation in Crimea, striking Saki airfield's command post. So this looks like, I don't know if command post is, I think this looks like the air base, what do you call it? The tower that you have at an airport. Anyway, that thing. looks to have been hit. An Orion drone storage unit, a Tor M2, so air defense system, Panzer S1 air defense system, ZU-23-2 mounted on a Kamaz truck air defense system, all taken out by these I presume they're FP2s. They might not be, but it probably says it somewhere. It often does. It might not be FP2s, but you get what I'm saying. And these seem to be these first person view drones that are taking out really significant targets. That's that command tower for an airbase. I mean, it's quite a quick montage here, but these are significant. I mean, even just that couple of seconds, it might not mean an awful lot. You could almost miss this, right? You can watch a video like this and go, oh, look, there's some gray stuff, there's some movement, green crosshair, and then it cuts out. But that is probably a really high value bit of structure that has been hit by probably 105 kilogram warhead drone. I mean, I hope that is just a really significant hit. And all sorts going on here. I don't know what is taking place in this. Maybe you can make head or tail of this. So there's something. Is that an air defense missile that's gone close to this, taking it out? I don't know, but there are other buildings being hit. There's just a whole bunch of stuff being blown up. And so when I mentioned earlier that Ukraine is probably hitting things in its cumulative fashion, that you don't realize the sheer volume of what they're hitting on a nightly basis, that eventually Russia go, oh, bugger, actually our capabilities have been really, really degraded here. And particularly Crimea, I just think, I presume, I mean, it talks about Saki airfield there, so I presume all of this is coming from Crimea. Just who would want to be operating any kind of air defense unit in Crimea? You'd just be thinking, God, are we for the high jump tonight? Is this our night? Yeah, and so that's another video, and I've been sharing these videos with you literally virtually every day now for weeks, it seems. That just the Ukrainians, I think, if I'm feeling pretty bullish about the Ukrainian situation, they've done a pretty good job with these FP2 drones. Now, talking about feeling bullish, I haven't released it yet. I'm going to release it tomorrow if I get permission. But I interviewed James from Why Ukraine. Now, most of you guys that have been with me over time will know James. He was with the International Legion, then he was with another unit, the Birds of Fury drone unit. He's an American that was based in Zakarpattia. Then he joined the International Legion, and he's now in Azov. And I can say that now. So he spent months, he applied to them, and he was like, mate, you can't tell anyone, but I'm applying for these guys, and I hopefully going to get through. And then he got through, and it's like, you can't say, and blah blah blah, training and all that. And anyway, he's involved with helping out the Azov International Battalion within the 12th Brigade, I think, of Azov. And I interviewed him, or had a chat. It's not an interview. I chatted with him today on a pre-record, and it was a fascinating conversation. Honestly, it was a really good chat. And we were talking about drones and all sorts. And he's over that neck of the woods in the east somewhere. I can't tell you where. But I came away from that conversation actually quite positive about how Ukraine is doing. And I think it's quite easy to be down about land that they're losing and troops that they're losing, but this is war, and it's all about the relative losses that each side are taking. And I think actually Ukraine has done a pretty good job of holding on to Kupiansk, done a pretty good job of holding on to Pokrovsk. And the Russians have, and Zelenskyy said this today, that, the Ukrainians took back 11.5 square kilometers in the Pokrovsk direction, and the Russians are taking huge losses. And it does appear to be the case that the Russians are indeed taking huge losses in Pokrovsk. Gallipoli is a bit more of a worry down on the southern front around Zaporizhia, but is it's quite easy to be down about Ukraine, especially when you look at, say, American diplomacy, foreign diplomacy, and then that kind of taints your understanding of what's going on the front lines. Scruffy Tales, he's got a YouTube channel, Swedish guy that is does some good mapping. He did a video on Prokrovska's holding, and he looked at like the amount of land involved in attacks in World War II between Germany and the Soviet Union, and the amount of deaths. And he's like, relatively speaking, the Ukrainians are doing a pretty bloody good job. So it's about perspective and looking at the whole of Ukraine and understanding how much land is being taken and how much of a cost is being taken from Russia. I do worry about Russia's ability to mobilize foreign troops. I think that, as long as they can rely on foreign troops, then they can prolong the war. As long as China keeps assisting them, they can prolong the war, and North Korea. So those are elements like external inputs. What you want is Ukraine to be propped up by external inputs from all their allies, but Russia not to be propped up by external inputs from all their allies. We want an asymmetry here whereby we can help Ukraine, but no one else can help Russia, because Ukraine are the good guys and Russia the bad guys. And so that's a justified asymmetry, right? That's how we should understand. That's how I understand the war. It's a black and white war. It's obvious that Ukraine are the good guys, Russia are the bad guys, and so no one should be justified in helping Russia. So they shouldn't be able to draft all these troops from all over the place, and Ukraine should be able to, but that's not the case. Like, Russia is still relying very heavily on North Korea and Russia and Iran, and that is allowing them to prolong the war, and that's really frustrating, because Ukraine are doing a really good job of having a decent attritional ratio. Anyway, let's get back to more news. We'll probably do that in a second. Let's just see if Benny Pie has brought out some more good comments from you guys. Wayne's World of SciTech says, gotta wonder how badly the super yacht industry is doing since their biggest customers are all being sanctioned. That's not a domain I have looked at much, but poor super yacht industry. But yeah, interesting. Levko again says, I wonder if they're attacking oil tankers because they have access to more ammunition produced within Ukraine and have taken out the majority of refineries. I don't know. The question is, what would the rationale be for them to strike those tankers? Why would you do that rather than striking at refineries? Possibly. So recently, just to rewind a little bit, I was saying a couple of weeks back or a month or two back that Ukraine changed their arms export legislation and regulation such that they said that, because at the beginning of the war, for obvious reasons, they said we're not allowed to export any arms outside of Ukraine for obvious reasons, because we need to use all of that stuff, right? So we can't try and make money off selling it, because that would denude our own troops from using these weapons. But then it got to a point where they'd ramped up their industrial complex to a stage where they were producing enough, or they had capacity of certain armaments that they couldn't use on the front line enough. And they said, right, we might as well sell this stuff. We might as well allow ourselves to sell this stuff. And then that brings in income, a profit that we can plow back into our own arms industry to then make more of the stuff that we actually need. And one of the things they said was, we are looking to sell USVs, unmanned surface vehicles, which would indicate that they had a surplus of USVs that they couldn't use for one reason or another. And I was asking whether they're not as effective at striking at ports as we would like them to be, because they put booms across ports and they protect things, and they're quite easy to shoot down, aren't they? Or is it not shoot down, to sink, because these things are, they can't fly up and down. They float on water, and that's it. They're on this one single plane, and once you spot them, you know where they are. They don't move crazy quick, and you just shoot them down with missiles or heavy machine guns or whatever. It's fairly easy, I think, comparatively speaking, to blow up unmanned surface vehicles, right? So I reckon Ukraine got to this point where they're like, we developed these USVs to the point where they're pretty good and we can use them in certain contexts, but actually we can't use a massive amount of them because they just get blown up. So let's sell them, right? And other nations can buy them. We can make a profit and plow that back into our industry. And so I wonder whether, like Levko here says, you know, they've got access to more ammunition. They've got access to more USVs. They're like, well, we've got a shed load of these USVs. You can only use them in the Black Sea. Like there's a limited space where we can use these. We have a certain amount of them. We maybe don't have the bandwidth to be able to send like 50 at a time. So there's only so many we can send. We keep sending them Novorossiysk and Tuapse, and occasionally some get through, but we're losing, like, I don't know, I'm making this up, but let's say they say we're losing one drone gets through for every 30 that we send. Something like, I don't know. I have no idea whether that's accurate. Or we can, that's not a good ratio. Let's use them for something else. Well, what can we blow up? Well, we've got these, you know, grey fleet, these shadow fleet tankers. Should we have a go at them? Well, I don't know. It's a bit dodgy. They're kind of Russian, but they're not sort of Russian. And then maybe it's a case of like, okay, well, we've got 30 of these bloody USVs just sitting around doing the square root of NAF, so we might as well use them. And then they send them and then blow up a tanker. And I'm like, well, that was easy, wasn't it? We only used 5 of them. I mean, it took us 100 USVs to get a couple through into APSI. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. I mean, I'm just spitballing here with you, but there could be a sense that they've just got a lot of extra capacity with USVs, and they don't know how to use them. So ATP Geo Viggo Holmson says both ships here run the Gambian flag. MT Kairos is 23 years old. MT Virat only 7. Strikes in international waters are illegal. So Viggo, I presume what you're saying here is these are Gambian ships effectively, and what Ukraine has done is illegal, which goes back to the point where I think that's really high risk what they've done. If they, well, one has supposedly hit a mine. So let's talk about one ship being struck, if that is indeed true. Russia always warns about crossing red lines and then does nothing. Yes, this is absolutely true. HC 9449. We should have learnt by now that Russia is full of empty threats. Jeff Thompson says, if you're sending ships to Russia, you are funding the war and you are breaking international sanctions, so you're a fair target. I don't know that that's true in terms of international law. Like, I don't know. If you are breaking sanctions laws, sanctions aren't international laws. Those are individual countries saying that we are no longer going to sanction buying oil off you. But just because the US, EU, and whoever else is sanctioning Lukoil and Rosneft, for example, it doesn't mean that, I don't know, let's have a Papua New Guinea. It doesn't mean that Papua New Guinea cannot legally buy stuff off Russia. Like, it's not international law. It is merely countries or groups of countries sanctioning Russia. So if third-party countries then buy stuff off Russia, that's not illegal. So what then these countries over here then start doing is like, well, we will introduce secondary sanctions. And secondary sanctions are like, okay, we can't buy stuff off Russia, But if you, Papua New Guinea, buy oil off Russia, we're going to punish you. It's not illegal. We're just saying that if you buy stuff off Russia, we won't buy stuff off you. And we will put pressure on you in other economic ways. But this is nothing to do with legality. So breaking international sanctions, I could be wrong here, but this is the way I would interpret it. Sanctions are not international law. So if these ships are breaking sanctions, they're not breaking the law, and therefore it doesn't justify blowing them up. And even if they were breaking international law, it also doesn't justify blowing them up. And this is kind of, you can draw analogies with what the US is doing in the Caribbean with the Venezuelan boats. It's like, even if you are selling drugs or you know, you are shipping drugs on these boats, it doesn't justify the US blowing up those boats. Like, so one, you have the difference between sanctions and law, and two, you have whether blowing up things is justified, even if you're breaking either sanctions or law. So just, Jeff, I appreciate that, but I would question whether that is the term a fair target. So this is, again, I've been through this a bunch on the channel. The difference between legality and morality. So we often conflate, so we confuse the law with morality. Now, in a perfect world, our laws should align perfectly with our morality, with our personal moral compasses. And it would be great if all of us aligned our moral evaluations to the point where we then develop laws that reflect all of our moral calculuses. But the reality is that we have a set of laws that have been developed over time, and some of us will go, yeah, those laws are brilliant, and some of us will go, oh, I like that law, but that law sucks. Like, I hate this thing, and you guys support that thing, and I hate that, right? So when we say it's a fair target, that is a moral evaluation from a personal point of view. Sorry to get a bit philosophical here, but like what Jeff is doing here is saying, right, I think it's personally fair for Russia to blow up those tankers. And do you know what, Jeff? I kind of agree with you, right? From my personal point of view, I look at those tankers blowing up and I think, that's all right. That's stopping the war. And I create a moral calculation that says that stopping these tankers making money for Russia is a greater good. Like, blowing that tanker up is an evil for a greater good, right? And that is moral consequentialism. And I can build up a really good case that blowing up those tankers is indeed fair from my personal point of view. But my moral calculation has nothing to do with what international law is. I might think that's fair, and Jeff might think that's fair, but it doesn't mean it's legal. And that's the problem that Ukraine has, is like, yeah, of course we're going to blow up these tankers, but actually international law says, well, yeah, I can understand why you might have done that, but it is still illegal as according to all international maritime law. And therefore what you've done is against the international rules and norms, and therefore people are going to get pissed off with you. It's an excuse for people to have a go at you. So I think there's an interesting distinction there. I hope I'm making sense for you, because as I've said, I've had a bottle of wine and things are difficult in my head. Cyberbeat Kenshi says, JP, the problem is Russia doesn't care about the rules, so we need to go after any known Russian vessel, even if it's buried beneath fake flags and companies. They need to be stopped. Exactly the same conversation. Like, on the one hand, yeah, I get that, but on the other hand, if you do that, if you allow Ukraine to consistently break the law, then they don't have the moral high ground anymore. They don't have the legal high ground anymore. We can debate about the moral high ground, because, as I've said, there's a differentiation between legality and morality. But I think it's a slippery slope, and this is the problem for Ukraine: is they are beholden to law, and Russia aren't, and so Russia can convey an advantage. As I keep saying, there's an asymmetry there because Russia doesn't have to adhere to the laws; they've just blown the laws out the water, and no one seems to give a shit. And Russia can therefore get an advantage on a battlefield. They're like, well, we don't have to capture these soldiers. We don't have to spend the energy putting them into a prison, looking after them, giving them food and water, transporting them back, using our troops to transport these troops all the way back to here, put them in that prison, sort this out. We just shoot them. We just shoot them, and that's that. And actually, that's an advantage to us. So we shoot them, and then we get on and fight over there. Now, that's illegal, and it's morally reprehensible, but they actually convey a bit of advantage by doing that, because no one cares that they break the law anymore, because we've seen them do it 100,000 times. Literally, it's something like 170,000 registered war crimes, and no one bats an eyelid anymore. So they're like, yeah, whatever. So we can break the laws. But if Ukraine does that, then everyone goes, oh, we can't give them any aid anymore. Look at what the Czech Republic did. They're not giving them the Flamingo funding that they had generated for them because of the corruption scandal. So the Ukraine start breaking the law here. Unfortunately, like whether you like it or not, whether I like it or not, they will be punished. Russia is not getting. Do you know what? Russia's not getting punished to the point that the US wanted to wipe the slate clean of their war crimes. But I mean, that's how much Russia is able to get away with this. I mean, the unfair playing field here is so overt. Russia's done 170,000 war crimes, and the US comes along and says, oh, don't worry about that. Ukraine, can you give some more of your land to Russia, please? Ukraine has a corruption scandal, and that charity that's just raised 500,000 euros in a day says, oh, you're not getting that money anymore. That's how unfair the situation is. So, yeah, I understand your intuition, Cyberbeep, here in saying that they don't care about the world, so we shouldn't care about the rules. Problem is that will bite Ukraine on the ass, and it's unfair. It is unfair. It is absolutely unfair. Ukraine is not a level playing field, and that's what pisses me off about this whole war. It's a black and white. It's a morally black and white war. And Russia just get this consistent advantage from being bastards the entire time. It is just unfair. I hope I made myself clear. But thanks for these comments are so rich. Thank you. Robert Peart, it's good to hear from you, mate. I haven't heard from you for ages. Haven't bought around in a while. I said that without having read this. Haven't bought around in a while. Here's to the weekend. Cheers, mate. I really appreciate that. Always love. And your little bubba there in your avatar must be like, I don't know, 17 now or something. The amount of time I feel I've been doing this. Thanks, Robert. Really appreciate that. Really, really do. Good to hear from you. Tom, Doris needs a new purse. She needs a massive canister of mace. Mortar on 7. Thank you for some Czech love, I presume here. Russia pretends they want peace because that puts pressure on Ukraine, which prolongs the talks and gives Russia more time. 100%. Russia is just biding for time the entire process here. Like everything they do is like more time, because that then they think they're going to win this war on the battlefield, and they think we can take more war. Or even if they don't think they can win it, the more territory they take, when even Europe and the US say, right, so Europe's position has been the starting point for negotiations is the current front lines. So if that's the case, if the starting point is current front lines, then that is an incentive to Russia to push the current front lines forward. So the more they can push the front lines forward, and if they don't give a shit about human lives, then there's like, well, okay, there's another couple of tens of thousands of Russians and Kenyans and bloody, I don't know, Cubans and whatever. Like, yeah, okay, just more land, more land, more land. And then we'll start negotiations. And the starting point would be however much land we've got. And chances are we're going to keep that land. So we might as well take more land. So let's pretend we want peace, but not really want peace. And then let's scupper these negotiations by maybe leaking stuff. I don't know who leaked the conversations recently, but you can build up a case that Russia leaked them, because it's like, well, that scuppered the negotiations. So then let's keep on pretending that we're sort of interested in peace, but we're not really, and we'll take more land. Yeah, 100%, mate. 100%. Paul Gilbert, good to have you on board. Russia is weak and the US will self-destruct. Both of these are true. Best to hold fast and increase pressure on both Russia and the USA. Paul, I think someone came out today and said, and it would, I say someone, it was a Ukrainian commander. Someone, I think I've got it on lined up for tomorrow's Hits and Losses video. And he said, we just need another 6 to 8 months. And that was his calculation. Now, whatever. I mean, it's a human being's speculation about how long Ukraine needs to hold on. But I found that quite an interesting position from a Ukrainian who's involved in the war to say 6 to 8 months. We need to weather this kind of winter period. And then the idea was Russia's economy. Then his opinion was the economy and everything else will start biting and Russia will be in serious trouble. Just 6 to 8 months. That's all we need. And you could argue that if you look at the trajectory for American politics at the moment, like the popularity of Trump is going down empirically. It's going down, although amongst Republicans it's still fairly solid, but independents and Democrats, it's going down. He's in trouble, and if that keeps going, watch out for the Tennessee special election coming up in the next few days. That's a Republican plus 22 district. And Afton Bain, the Democrat challenger for that special election, is -2 at the moment. In other words, according to the polls, the swing is 20 points. So 20-point swing in a deep red district of a deep red state of Tennessee to the Democrats. And if she wins or comes within margin of error or like close enough there, then that is an absolute 5-alarm bell sound for the Republicans. And we've already seen this from the elections the other Tuesday and all the polls and everything. What that means is that Trump's position isn't that stable. And if you have Russia weak and you have the US weak, and if Europe can stay strong and Ukraine can withhold pressure for 6 to 8 months, the problem is for Europe, you've got Orban pissing off to, this is another thing I wanted to talk about tonight. Orban spent like 3 hours talking to Putin today, like in some kind of mutual fellatio. And it's just a shocker. And Tusk came out today, Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister of Poland, saying, God, what a shocker of a day. You've got like corruption scandal. You got Peter Shihata, the foreign minister for, no, it wasn't Peter Shihata. Who was it? It was someone else who was visiting Orban. Orban was visiting Putin, blah, 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 blah. And like, it's just like a bit like my live stream tonight. It's all gone crazy. Donald Tusk was like, it's all nuts. What's going on? But then the good news is that the polls for Orban for his spring election are looking very bad. And there's every chance that Peter Magyar, his opposition challenger, could win the elections is very likely to win the elections in Hungary. And so, you know, it's just all over the shop. Goodness me. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with all that, but yes, Paul, something like an agreement with what you say. Jonathan from Silicon Curtain. Hi, mate. Jonathan is in. He's probably not listening anymore because he's in Kiev at the moment and it's probably 2 a.m. So he's undoubtedly not listening anymore. Although he says here, drones incoming and loud returning fire, whining sounds of their engines circling across the city. This is pure barbarism. That's fascinating to get your insight as to what is happening as we speak. So thanks for that, Jonathan. I've still got to share another couple of things with you, but so many of you have great comments. Papa Dutch, good to have you on board, mate. How weak is Russia? The national gold reserve is intended to represent the value of the ruble. If the gold is gone, the ruble is the only is only paper and bits of cheap metal. They're dismantling their money. I reported this morning that the National Wealth Fund is divesting their gold reserves, and that is a good sign that things are not good economically in Russia. And I think the central, so that you've got, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you've got Sovereign Wealth Fund, National Wealth Fund, sorry, central bank, and all the other banks all have different gold reserves, and they all seem to be selling them at the moment, and that is not good news for the Russian economy. King Raccoon says, meanwhile, 40 drones are chugging around. A short while ago it was over 50, but air defense, especially in Kiev, is trimming the numbers quickly. That's good news. Cheryl, thanks, mate. Cheryl says, Yermak, when the Russian forces were right outside the president's door, I'll share the Guardian link, but I've heard it elsewhere in more detail. I'm not sure what you're talking about there. Sorry. Yeah, I'm not sure there, Cheryl. I may have missed a part of the conversation. Maybe we'll get lucky and Witkoff will be in an oil refinery tonight. Nice one, Jenny. Yeah, Witkoff, I think, is on the way to Russia sometime next week. I can't believe that man is still able to do what he is doing at the moment. I obviously need to look at this Guardian article. Russian forces came close to capturing Zelenskyy during the first hours of the invasion. So I have to look up that, but thank you, Cheryl. The Pirate, thank you for your Norwegian love there. Let's get to 100k subs. That would be absolutely brilliant. Up 100 subs. Well, thank you very much to those who have subscribed. And thank you, The Pirate, always a great supporter. Darwinism writ large. I'm not sure what that's in reference to, Papa Dutch, but I've got a Darwin t-shirt. It says Viva, and it's got Darwin's picture there with like a Che Guevara kind of beret on. So it's Charles Darwin. It says Viva, and you could be forgiven for thinking it says Viva la Revolution, but it says Viva Evolution, and it's one of my favorite t-shirts. I don't wear it. I don't think I've worn that for you guys. Goose Springsteen, good to have you on board, mate. I really appreciate your work as always, JP. UK defence chiefs are saying that SDR won't, that Strategic Defence Review, won't be kept to with current funding. I know I'm a hawk, but if we don't properly fund the military now, when will we? Right. Oh, this is not the time and place for this, Goose. But I was talking about this with my in-laws today, trying to explain, and I was having a debate on Facebook, and I was speaking to Mark from the Little Whiskey Shop last night about this. Right. The UK is financially in a bit of spot bother at the moment, but it's the same for any nation. You've got three ways, like simplistically, and I'm no economist. I've got like an A level in economics, but whatever. I'm no economist. But the way I understand economics is you've got three ways of generating money. One is reducing costs. It's not really generating money, but it's saving you money. One is reducing costs, which is going to be stripping out, generally speaking, your kind of welfare or education or healthcare or whatever. And in the UK, actually, most people will think, oh, that's, you know, immigrants get all this welfare, blah, 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 blah. But in reality, actually, pension and the NHS take up a huge amount of our welfare expenditure. And the pensions have a triple lock on them, and they're promised not to touch them. But really, we want to be, they're probably trying to save some money on the pensions. But that's too controversial. So you can either cut costs or you can raise taxes. Now, raising taxes is either going to be taxes on like just people, as in employees, in terms of any sort of tax, or on corporations and companies or profits. But either way, it's going to be broadly inflationary, and broadly it's going to piss people off. So you're either going to raise taxes or cut costs, both of which are going to piss people off, or you attract inward investment. So as a closed system, like rather than extract money from your people or cut money being taken from your people. You want to attract money from other people that's outside your closed system. So the best way of generating money is going to be inward investment. But now we're learning the true cost of, and I'm sorry to mention Brexit again, but there have been like Stanford and the the Commons Library have come out, two separate entities plus previous entities have come up with more evaluations of the cost of Brexit. And the cost of Brexit has been thought to be, I think it's Stanford this week, or was it the Commons Library, one of the two, saying 90 billion pounds of tax income, not 90 billion pounds of trade. 90 billion pounds of tax income has been lost annually. Every year, the UK is 90 billion pounds worse off from being outside of the EU. So we are starting to really understand how desperately economically insane Brexit was. It was an absolute clusterfuck of a decision, right? And I'm sorry to swear, but it really was. And all the evidence is now coming in just repeatedly. And when you're talking about inward investment, so if you want to attract money into your closed system, then you need to be saying to multinationals, come and invest in us to generate your profits, and then we can tax that. But to get people to invest in us, like if they're manufacturing, you say, come and invest in the UK. We have 70 million people that live here, and you can sell for free to 70 million people. But by the way, your widgets that you build in the UK, if you want to export them to the EU, where there's 500 million people, you're going to have to pay a tariff on that widget to export it to 500 million people. So this company from outside of Europe has a choice of like, do we set up in the UK where we can freely access 70 million people, or do we set up in the EU where we can freely access 500 million people and pay to access 70 million people? Do we set up in the UK to freely access 70 million people but pay to access 500 million people? Every time a coconut, you're going to be setting up in the EU. So we are going to struggle to gain inward investment unless we have a customs union with the EU. So like our government or any government the number one thing they should be doing at the moment in the UK, I'm not talking about any other nation, is to have a customs union with the EU. We are getting economically screwed at the moment. So like either you raise taxes or you cut welfare or you get inward investment. At the moment, none of those things are looking pretty for the UK. However, I would have to say our tax burden is much lower than the Scandinavian nations in terms of VAT, in terms of corporation taxes and income taxes. And the Scandinavian countries have the highest level of happiness in the world. So you can build up a case that actually our tax burden needs to go up. Everyone's shitting their pants about Labour putting taxes up, but our taxes are lower than they are in the Scandinavian countries, and they're happier and they've got better services because they pay for them. So, Goose, if you're going back to our strategic defense review and the fact that they come up with a pretty decent strategic defense review, which is what we need to do with our armed forces strategically over the next 10 years or whatever, but then they've come up with this great plan, but we can't afford it. Question is, okay, what would you do to afford it? What would you do, Goose, to pay for what we need to do to secure our nation? Do you raise taxes? Do you cut welfare? And where would you cut welfare? Because if you look at things like benefit fraud, where most people go, oh, look at the benefit fraud. I've been watching this Channel 5 program about how people are screwing over the nation by claiming welfare when they're not entitled to it. That's worth that. Do you know what tax avoidance is worth? I'm going to find you this because I shared it today. I shared this today on my face crack. Here it is. I found it already. Okay, let's draw that image over to there. There you go. This is how instantaneous I can be, my friends. Right, let's get back to where I was. Right. So, Goose and anyone else, Benefit fraud versus tax evasion. Tax avoided, evaded, and uncollected. Here on the right, tax avoided, evaded, and uncollected HMRC estimate, Tax Justice Network and PCS estimate. So depending on who's doing the estimation, benefits that are unclaimed, and then benefit errors, mistakes by HMRC, and then or DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, and then benefit fraud. Benefit fraud, like everyone goes, oh, I hate these freaking poor people that keep scamming the government and claiming unemployment benefit when they're really actually employed, blah, blah, blah. It's worth basically nothing compared to tax avoidance. Like the fact that Amazon, I paid more tax than Amazon, like in a couple of years ago, and probably still am. Like me as one individual, and you, if you're a British citizen, you probably pay more tax in the UK than bloody Amazon, because they do all this funky shit that means that they avoid paying tax. That's what we need to do. We need our HMRC to get onto that kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm digressing. Like, if we want to pay for the Strategic Defense Review, how do you suggest doing it? I would suggest tightening tax laws on massive multinational corporations like Google and Amazon. And I suggest trying to attract inward investment by being in a customs union with the EU. That's what I would suggest. End of rant. Michael Glennon, by the way, thanks, Goose. Always a pleasure to have a chat. Michael McGlennon, thanks for your ongoing support for Ukraine, Jonathan. The world is far better informed by the team of people like you and those that you've collaborated with in an unselfish way. Inspiration for us mere mortals. That's honestly, that means an awful lot, mate. It really does, because, yeah, it just does. Thank you. Thank you, mate. And thank you for your exceptional kindness. It keeps the lights on. It really does. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Benny Pie, subscribe to the channel to stay up to date. 59,789 subscribers right now. Help us get to 60K. Benny Pie is as right as any human being has ever been right. I think, or something like that. Right. Papa Dutch, tankers tangle the props and rudders, then take them under tow. International law of salvage applies. Interesting approach there from Papa Dutch. I'm not as au fait as you, but that sounds good to me, and there's less fire and less pollution. Just a few more of these, and we'll get back to some more news that I haven't shared with you. Goose Springsteen, could you expand on what you think a realistic best case peace for Ukraine? Oh, Jesus. Current front lines and no de jure recognition of Russian gains. Oh man, this is like an hour-long video. Current front lines and no de jure recognition of Russian gains with NATO light security guarantees. I think state survival is a victory for Ukraine. I don't know I can do justice to that question right now. Partly because I'm all over the shop in what I think. And it really depends. So the answer to this question, Goose, and it's a bloody great question. Of course it is. It's like, how do you see this ending? The question is twofold. How do I see it ending in what's most likely? And how do I see it ending? What's the best case that it could be for Ukraine if different nations were to help Ukraine in the way that they should do? So, for example, the United States under Trump means that in reality, Ukraine is less likely to get a decent outcome, as decent as they could do. But if Trump changed tack, Ukraine could get a really good outcome. That's how important the United States is. So I think if Trump was to go hard on hammering Russia with massive sanctions and was to go hard on China and India to pressure them with secondary sanctions, then I really think Russia could capitulate quite significantly. And I think you could have a scenario where the US could pressure Crimea even to go back to Ukraine in negotiations, whereby they say, look, you are going to be a pariah state. You will not get any investment from the US. You will not get any hydrocarbon sales unless you give back all of that land to Ukraine. Yeah, you can threaten with nuclear missiles, but you're not going to do it. So we will screw you over ad infinitum. Like, we will not let up. You will be the pariah state until you give back ownership of Crimea and the Donbass to Ukraine. I think the United States could do that. They're not going to do that. Trump will never do that. He doesn't have the balls to do that, but it could happen. So when you say what do you think a realistic, your operative word there is realistic. Realistic best case scenario is probably something like the de facto control of the lines where they are at the moment, with some push and shove. I don't think Ukraine will allow Russia to get any more land through diplomacy. That would be ridiculous, like the whole of the Donbass. So I don't think that will happen. And it freaking shouldn't happen, of course. But what you might get is we'll draw the lines along here. We'll have a kind of demilitarized zone, and it'll be in stasis. And then we'll hope to get it back diplomatically in decades to come. But I could also see Ukraine arguing to get back, say, portions of Kherson. It just depends how ballsy everyone else is, like the EU and the US. So yeah, I don't know. So sometimes I'm more hopeful than that, and I think if Russia was to collapse economically, then Ukraine could actually take back lots of that land by a complete capitulation of the Russian armed forces because of an economic collapse in Russia, and then actually you could get much more of the occupied territories go back to Ukraine. But that would be contingent upon an awful lot of variables. And the question is, what's actually plausible? In a weird sense, the longer this goes on, the more likely Russia is, I think, to capitulate. Like, that sounds counterproductive. I think time is probably on Ukraine's side rather than Russia's side. I think that's why Russia and arguably the US want to wrap this up as quickly as possible, because that will be to the benefit of Russia. But then it goes back to this idea of whether Russia really understands the weakness of their own position, and it probably depends on how much Putin knows about the realities on the front line. But yeah, that's just, yeah, I kind of vacillate all over the shop, mate. But thanks, mate. Papa Dutch, my point being sinking an oiler is a bad idea. We have alternatives. Yeah, absolutely. I understand tangling out the propellers. Yeah, I'd rather not have an an environmental disaster. Absolutely, Papa Dutch. Yeah. Just a few more, and then let's get back to it. Julian Roster, I think the further the economic news tightens, the more desperate, vicious, and unpredictable Putin could get. Right at the beginning of this war, and I wrote an article on this as well when I was writing for Only Sky when they were still around. I wrote an article and did a video called The Putin Paradox. And the Putin Paradox is the worse things are for Russia and for Putin, because he's existentially connected personally to the outcome of the war. Because if Russia loses the war, then Putin loses power and loses potentially his life, right? In a way that's not the same for Zelenskyy. If Ukraine loses the war, worst case scenario, Zelenskyy goes and lives abroad somewhere. If Russia loses the war, he's a genocidal dictator who gets deposed and he ends up in a gulag or dead, right? No dictators really retire into their super yachts. It's very rare. So that's why dictators want to hold on to power for as long as possible, because their future existence depends on it. So I call this a Putin paradox, which is like the better Ukraine do, arguably the worse Ukraine do. By point of fact, or by point of idea, that if Ukraine do better and better on the front lines and in the war and economically against Russia, then Putin panics and he's like a caged tiger or an injured animal that's backed into a corner, and they fight even harder. And Putin goes, and presses the red button. Do you know, he's more likely to like start a nuclear war or do something absolutely nuts if he is properly pressed. So I think, Julian, you've got an absolute point there. I think the further the economic news tightens, the more desperate, vicious, and unpredictable Putin could get. Like, if you haven't seen it, Julian, go and watch and it's like 3 years old now, that video, but the video called The Putin Paradox is exactly that point. And because you made a point that I made, I'm going to say your point is genius, Julian. You are such a clever guy. I think you're one of the cleverest point makers I've ever listened to. So thank you. Goose, look, let me get on with my next things, mate. Russia seem utterly disinterested in peace, yes, but I worry about a prolonged war for Ukraine. Possibly, yes. The longer it goes on, the harder it will be for Ukraine to get refugees back, yes. And post-war looks bleak without a return, yes. I mean, absolutely right, Goose. One of the issues with the length of a war is that, and this is the case with any refugees, not just to do with the Ukraine war, but the longer, I mean, it's pretty obvious. The longer you have to set roots in whatever country you've refugeed to, the less likely you are to return. And Ukraine needs them for cultural reasons, but also for tax reasons, for demographic reasons, for having children, for population. They're desperate for people to come back to Ukraine. And the longer the war goes on, the less likely it is that the people who escape to other countries will come back. So absolutely, that is a massive challenge for Ukraine. There's no doubt about that. JR, good to have you on board. Some restrictions need to be loosened, some morals you do not want to lose. I'm not sure what that's in reaction to, but it sounds pretty sensible to me. It sounds like you're being clever. Also, please watch Vlad Vexler regarding a Jay McGlynn article. I wanted to interview her about Europe's failures on Ukraine from a few days ago. It's sobering, but very important. Thanks, Goose. I will have to check that out. I haven't seen that, so I will have to go and search that out. The Pirate, sorry, I've never have good questions because the rest of the chat is awesome. So I like to give love and peace and some to JP, Little Whiskey Shop Fund. Dude, I appreciate that. Right, let's get back to where I was trying to get to, which was the other bits of crazy news. And by the way, thanks to all those super chats that have come in. You are super, super kind. I want to get back to this, though. Not only have we seen like tankers blow up, Andriy Yermak resign, FP2 drones blow up things in Crimea and blah, blah, blah. But we've had this happening in Russia. So Russia's, and remember, I reported this morning that the Roscosmos, the space shuttle launch site, had an issue today or yesterday where some cabin like fell apart, and now for the first time since 1961 they can't send someone to space. So this is all like disaster for Russia that looks good for anyone that doesn't like Russia. Putin's latest intercontinental ballistic missile, the RS-28 Sarmat. So remember, they tried to launch this again. Is it 2 out of 3 of the launches have been complete disasters that have blown up? And now we've got another launch of the Satan II. It failed spectacularly at the Yasnoe cosmodrome test site in Orenburg region. And it didn't just fail spectacularly, but there was these plumes of purple smoke denoting, disaster. So you've got this missile that went up, or this, I don't know, missiles, the rocket that went up, and then, yeah, it didn't look good, turning upside down and then kicking out rainbow colors. And then, yeah, that's the end of that bad boy. It is coming back down. And if I was an astronaut looking at thinking, you want me to go up in that, like in a couple of months' time? Yeah, I don't know. I might take up art again. I might paint. I might paint some pictures. I've got quite a nice patio. I've got a table. I just set. Yeah, not too sure. So anyway, that's a disaster. And lots of people have been talking about this today. As you can see here, new footage of a failed Russian rocket launch, probably a UR-100N intercontinental ballistic missile with avant-garde hypersonic warhead, or a Sarmat missile, according to Militiani and other sources. So actually, this is a missile. It's not. Sorry, I was confusing myself with thinking an astronaut was going to be looking at this. An astronaut's not going to be riding a freaking intercontinental ballistic missile. That shows you how much wine I've drunk tonight. Yeah, no astronaut's going to be looking at it thinking, please don't send me up in that, unless he's riding it like a freaking bucking bronco, like a rodeo. Yeehaw! I'm going to ride this bad boy to Ukraine. Oh no, I'm dead. So that's not happening. But anyway, that's not good news for Russia's future of intercontinental ballistic missiles. It is rather embarrassing. So, new footage of the failed Russian rocket launch, according to Militiani and other sources, it is, yeah, not a good look for Russia there. And as mentioned, there, big explosion there, and then huge plumes of purple smoke erupting out of the site of the explosion, and some fairly colourful language from people watching on. And as you would imagine, I did have some. Oh, there it is. There's some colourful smoke. Look, purple smoke. Purple smoke cloud rose over Russia's Yasnoe missile base in Orenburg region following an explosion, with locals reporting a failed rocket launch that detonated midair, according to Astra. And then I'm just going to leave you with, or not going to leave you, because some more super chats and questions to go through. But the analyst here talks about the loss of Andriy Yermak resigning. It's a deep blow to Zelenskyy. Andriy Yermak, chief of staff of the president, had his office and home raided by the anti-corruption authorities. A wide net has been cast over the kickback scheme involving the electricity grid protection program. Yermak insists he is innocent, yet the pressure on him has been huge, and there have been many people who will be glad to see the back of him. I think he's not always been advising the president well. For Zelenskyy, having someone he believes he knows and trusts as deeply as Yermak, with whom he has had a long personal and working relationship from well beyond the days of politics and TV production, was really important. Totally agree with that. I think this is going to be a hole in Ukraine, in Zelenskyy's being, really. When you have that, what feels like the weight of a nation on your shoulders, you need someone to share it with who understands you implicitly. From a personal perspective, it must be deeply hurtful. I think, like, assuming Zelenskyy is not implicated in anything, just from a personal and therefore political point of view, because the person is the president, this is hugely impactful for him. And I think, do not underestimate the personal costs of Zelenskyy for this. Worse still, if it implies, on top of others who have betrayed him and their country and were their friends, it piles, on top of others. And it's not the first time to be betrayed by your own in the midst of war for the nation's survival is deeply shameful and deeply disappointing. It's a breach of friendship, trust, loyalty, respect, honor, and duty. That Zelenskyy has let this happen and stand aside as the investigation happens shows his mettle. He knows this is a sacrifice he must make for himself and for his country. That he has allowed it to proceed unhindered says much about him. I hope Yermak is exonerated, but if not, he deserves punishment. Yep, I agree with pretty much all of that. I might just slightly change that I don't know that Zelenskyy had any choice. So I don't know that it shows his mettle. And I think very highly of Zelenskyy. It's just that honestly, I don't think he had any choice other than to let the process play out. And final thing I had stored up for you is the daughter of South Africa's former president. So if you remember, the other morning I reported that the daughter of the former president, Jacob Zuma, has resigned, and she was responsible for drumming up some recruits for the Russian armed forces by, I think, sort of hoodwinking South African men into getting trained for being bodyguards, but actually, then going essentially to the front lines in the Ukraine. She's now resigned from parliament as a police investigation into how 17 citizens ended up stranded in eastern Ukraine after signing Russian military contracts they believe were for bodyguard training. So she has had some comeuppance there, it seems. Now, as I go back onto full screen, I do want to just check if any other insane stuff has happened since I've been whittling onto you guys. Kiev is under a lot of attack. I think, the capital is being hit. Yeah, I think it's all about Russia attacking Ukraine at the moment, particularly Kiev. Yeah, ballistic missiles included, but hopefully it won't be too damaging. That's a lovely picture, although it probably indicates, I don't know. That's a pretty impressive picture, even though the caption is "Child injured, homes damaged, and the latest Russian attack on Ukraine's capital." However, you know that the old statue of the, what is it, Maiden of the Motherland? I forget the exact name of it. I've been there a couple of times. Yeah, impressive picture. Anyway, let's get back to a couple of your comments, and then I'll let you go to bed, and then you can let me go to bed, and that, you know, it all ends happily ever after. Goose, more from no. We're not going to Goose. It is user and lots of letters and numbers. Thank you for your Swedish love for a super sticker there. When it comes up through this method through a StreamYard that I use, it doesn't always let me know exactly your correct name. So I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting you. User LH8RB5WX6Q or Fred or Vanessa or whatever your name is. Thank you. Paul Gilbert again. Here's to the excellent products from Mark and the Little Whiskey Shop. Loving my malt whiskey. Hick, hick. He says, "Oh, good that you've supported Mark. He's a great guy, Mark. We disagree politically, but you know, there's a lot of love there. So that's awesome. I wish Donald Tusk was the US president, but there would be, yeah, but where would that leave Poland?" Says Papa Dutch. Yeah, good point. My goodness, I did that video earlier on Donald Trump speaking to that female reporter, yet another reporter that he berates publicly in a deeply inappropriate way. It's just so unbecoming of the US president. Michel Deval, lately I'm hopeful for democracy again. Nice to see some light at the end of the tunnel. I'm not sure what you are referring to exactly there, but I'm so up and down on democracy, and sometimes I think it's all over, and that populism is taking hold and it's got an autocratic, undemocratic bent. And then other times I think there is a bit of hope. So I really oscillate all over the shop on that one. Pirate again. How long can we get GP going tonight? Bets. Oh, Jesus, mate. I can't believe I did a live for a start, and I can't believe it's 1 hour 42 minutes and I'm still here. Gee whiz. I'm so glad you said this. It's a JR, and it's good to have you back, mate. I know you've not been very well or whatnot. But like I used to do the whole thing about it is 60,000. It is arbitrary numbers. So let's go for 61,653. That's what I'm aiming for. I don't care about any other number. You're absolutely right, mate. You're absolutely right. So yeah, 61,653. Right, Papa Dutch, de facto must not be allowed to trump de jure. Yeah, good point. Well, I'd rather de facto than de jure, though, to be honest. I don't want any legal recognition. And that's the thing that I hear tonight, that the US is up for legally recognizing Donbass and occupied territories. And that is an absolute disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace if there is truth to those claims. Johnny Nevergard, good to have you on board, mate. Ukrainian beer getting the respect there that it deserves. Goose again. Were I God Emperor of the UK, I would abolish a triple lock and put 1p income tax for all. We might be in some agreement, Goose. Who knew? I would also prioritize defense over welfare and public sector pay rises. I'm a public sector worker too, by the way. He says, yeah, I'm not sure we disagree too much there. It's funny. I had this big discussion with, as mentioned, Mark from the Little Whiskey Shop, who is way more conservative than me, like old school, like conservative, and I'm sort of centre left, whatever. But actually, when we started talking about where you generate money from and what the problems are, so here's the thing. There's something I want to say just to end off tonight with, and what pisses me off is that the UK has gone down this free market enterprise, free market capitalism route for decades and decades, but no one else has done that, right? The US sort of does that. But if you look at Europe, I can't believe that one of our main big six energy providers in the UK is EDF. And EDF is, I don't know what percentage it is government owned, but it's a French national company, basically. And it is one of our big energy companies in the UK. And then you look at Renault is, what is it? Is that 15% owned by the French government? And Stellantis, one of the biggest car conglomerates in the world, is 6.65% owned by the French government. And you look at all the, and then you look at our train industry in the UK. I don't know if you know this, Goose, but our train industry, our rail industry, has input from Japanese nationalized industry, Dutch nationalized industry, German nationalized industry. Like, if you honestly go and Google how much other nations have nationalized industries tendering for our public contracts and for our private contracts. I don't understand. Like, we are like, oh, free market, free market, free market. And every other nation's like, yeah, free market. Well done, UK. You're doing the free market thing. Well done. Anyway, we're not. And by the way, we're going to sell our wares back to you, and you're going to buy our stuff, except our stuff is nationalized. And so that puts money into our government coffers that then pays for our welfare state and our services. So the UK is, through the free market capitalist system, is bankrolling other nations' welfare states, which is fine if we did that too. The point is that we need to at least part nationalize so many more industries, because what we do in the UK, what Margaret Thatcher did was like, let's sell it all off and make loads of money right now. And then you make all this money, and then you're like, oh, now we can not make that again forever, consistently over time. So it's a cash cow immediately, but there's no return on that evermore. So I think, not that I believe in some kind of command economic situation, but I do think that it makes sense to have some national interests in different markets. And actually, that's what Trump is doing at the moment. Trump is no free marketeer. He's trying to like take, oh, hello, Nvidia and Intel will have 10% of you, blah, blah, blah. But there is a sense in that, which is like, yeah, and then that will make the government money going forward. It's not nationalizing these industries, but it's to say that actually we have a little bit of an input in there. So we, like in the banking crisis, the British government said we're going to bail out NatWest, right? And we bailed out NatWest. And then we sold back what we bailed out a bank. This is a bank, by the way. We sold it on the Royal Bank of Scotland as well, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we basically bailed out these banks and then took some of it back into the national ownership. But then we kind of sold it back as soon as we possibly could at a loss. And you're like, why have you done that? Oh, because we're desperate for cash. Well, like, it's just like insanity. So, Goose, I don't know what you think. You probably disagree with me, but I don't understand why, like, if I go out and buy a Renault car, like, that is benefiting the French government. But when someone buys a bit of British stuff, it's not benefiting the British government, because we've kind of don't really have national entities that we're pushing out to the rest of the world, because free market, free market, free market. So I just think that we're just a bit insane, and we need to change that. But there you go. Arthur Doyle, thank you very much for your ATP Geopolitics memberships. By the way, Goose, I was going to actually share those stats about how much other nations have national interests involved in our tendered contracts. Papa Dutch, oh please, rabbit on, Jonathan. I find myself quite enjoying it, mate. It's Friday night, it's late, it depends where you are in the world. Get yourself a wine. I've certainly had a wine, and I mean that in both senses of the word. Thank you, Sveanivia. Anyway, thank you. I really appreciate that for your Danish love there. Appreciated. So Putin Puppet says oil tankers under a non-Russian flag could be serving under a factually Russian shell company elsewhere on the planet. Yeah, actually, Putin Puppet, this is a really good point, and I think I hinted at this earlier. Like, we just don't know who actually owns those. I did talk about this because I said if they are owned by Russia, I think they are fair game. Like, if those two scare quotes Gambian ships, or that one ship that was hit by drones, is owned by the Russians, then I think that is as bona fide a target as an oil refinery. Like, if you justify hitting an oil refinery, then you're justifying hitting a Russian tanker operating in the Black Sea. I don't have a problem with that at all. So the key to the oil tanker situation is who owns those tankers. Yeah. I just love your ranting. I wasn't sure I was ranting. I thought I was just talking forcefully. I mean, I haven't had a massive moral rant tonight. I just been a bit forceful, maybe. I don't know, but I'm glad you appreciate my ranting. I struggle not to be honest. And Richard Goodall, thanks for the rant. Yeah, well, yes. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't, but I appreciate your support. Thanks, Richard. And thanks to all of you. It's super generous. The Pirate, my last, never get an answer from US YouTubers why socialism is a bad thing. Communist, why not pay a little bit more tax to have free healthcare? So, democratic socialism, or social democrats, all these different terms, they are sometimes swear words, no matter where you are. But what I like to do, like, okay, here's the thing, the Pirate, and you're obviously from Norway, so here you go. I'm gonna give you props. This is how you should organize your government, no matter what government you are, which is look around the world and say, what's the happiest? Like, so I'm going to get a bit philosophical. This is to end the talk tonight. Some of you already left. We only had a fraction of who was here at the beginning. Nonetheless, here we are. Nonetheless, here we are together. So what you always should be doing when you're working out morality. So let's talk a bit of philosophy here. You always want to, I think you should always try and derive your moral calculations down and down and down until you get to the basic, what's sometimes called the non-derivative currency of a value system, which is to say that if I say, why do you do that? And you say, well, because I did that because of this, and say, well, why is this important? You say, well, this is important because of that. And you say, okay, why is that important? You say, well, because of this. And at some point you get to a basic axiom that you can't derive further. And that's called a non-derivative value. So that normally, this is why happiness or lack of pain or harm is seen as so important in life. Because if I was to say to you, why did you do that? And you say, because of this. Why do you do that? Because of that. Why do you do that? Because of this. Why do you do that? Well, because it makes me happy. And I go, why do you want to be happy? And you go, well, because it's self-evidently a good thing. Like, I can't derive that any further because it makes me happy. Like, happiness is just self-evidently like a good state to be in. So this is seen as quite an axiom, and this is why often, like with utilitarian moral value systems, this is seen as like a most amount of happiness for the most amount of people, right? It's seen as quite axiomatic, quite basic, right? So when we're talking about politics, so why am I saying all this? Because when you're talking about like a little bit more tax, free healthcare, blah 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 blah, whatever, my position it would be like, what political system would make me or the average person the happiest? So the question is, should always be, well, or the answer should always be, well, look at the data, evidence-based policy making. Okay, so what are the happiest countries in the world? So you look at the happiness index, and you look at it over time, and you look at how the methodology works, and you think, okay, I basically agree with how that's put together. So what are the happiest countries in the world? And you look at Denmark and Finland and Norway and Sweden. Now, they are slightly skewed because of natural resources and stuff like that, and smaller populations. And there are some confounding variables that I think you would need to tease out there. So, for example, like you could try and replicate, say, Norway's politics in, I don't know, Mali, and you wouldn't be able to achieve that kind of happiness just because Mali doesn't have the natural geography, resources, and etc., to be able to generate the wealth that you could tax to give you the welfare system that creates the happiness. Okay, hopefully this all makes sense. It's late in the night and I've not thought about this at all. It's just spitballing. I mean, I have thought about this previously, but the idea is that so say for someone like the UK, which is somewhat comparable to the Nordic states, it's like, what should our government be doing? Well, it should be trying to make me as happy as possible. And you do that by giving me a decent, solid welfare system, good healthcare, education, all these things, a trust in institutions, all these things that build into how the happiness index is generated, like what the metrics are. And there's a lot that goes into this. Like if you want to look at the global happiness report, the annual happiness report, it's very, very complicated, and there are loads of things that go into it. But basically the Nordic nations come out really well. Just nick all their freaking policies. It's like, well, like if they're really happy, like what are they doing? Like Sven over there, he's bloody beaming, isn't he? Just, I want to be Sven. Like, why are you so bloody happy? Can I nick your country? So you just like take those policies. Now, understanding that, okay, there are physical geographical differences. So Norway, for example, is able to do a bunch of things to support its people because, again, we go back to like Goose Springsteen. We were talking about like nationalized industries. Like I keep saying to you, the sovereign wealth fund in Norway is underwritten by the national interest in the North Sea oil fields, where the Britain went, well, we're free market economics, so BP and Shell, you can just go for it and we'll eventually tax you occasionally. Oh, you've offshored it all. Oh, we can't tax you. Oh bugger. Whereas Norway went, if you're going to drill oil in our seabeds, then we're going to take whatever percentage of your turnover, profits, whatever, and that gets put into the sovereign wealth fund, and then that will underwrite our pension pots, etc., etc. Like, that's a good idea. So, okay, you need the natural resources in order to get that money, in order to have a decent welfare system that supports your population, so that they don't have existential crises. That means that if they lose their job, then they don't go, I've lost my job, I've got nothing left in life, oh my god, I'm going to fall apart. They go, I've lost my job, but the welfare state will pick me up, and then it will support me in looking for another job, and I've got a decent enough education to be able to go and get another job, and blah 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 blah. So all of these things come together to create a sense of existential security that means that you are generally happier. So you need to be looking at the nations that have the greatest existential security, that underwrites the greatest happiness, and say, well, as much as possible, I want to copy that. So what happens in those nations? Well, they have a higher tax burden, and a higher tax burden provides greater services for those nations, which includes universal healthcare generally, and decent education, like the PISA scores. Finland's always the top of the PISA scores, so on and so forth, right? And you get this situation where those are the countries I want to be a part of. I want to emulate. So when a Norwegian says to me, why not pay a little bit more tax to have free healthcare? I say, yeah, mate, you're spot on. You guys feature higher on the happiness index than we do in the UK, and the Americans do, and other nations. And so, yeah, let's take a leaf out of your book. So anyway, that's the end of my, it's not a rant, but spiel. Mitch, thanks, mate. Isn't it strange that Russia is selling gold 2 weeks after the UK ran low of physical gold at the traders? I'm not aware of this, Mitch, but I need to look into it. I know that during the last Labour government, we sold a bunch of gold reserves, but I wasn't sure we were doing anything with gold recently. I would need to look into that. So thank you for the heads up there, my friend. Papa Dutch, I wonder how much of the Russian National Gold Reserve is actually in the citizens' teeth as a result of outmoded dental techniques. Papa, that is outrageous. But good point, well made. Thanks, mate. Richard Goodall, thank you very much for your support, Richard. Really, really do appreciate it. And finally, as I'm sure, oh no, not finally, we've got a few more. Putin puppet, Yalabuga drone factory attack on Bing confirmed by different sources. I'm looking forward to tomorrow, to be honest, with regard to the Yalabuga strike and hopefully other strikes as well and information. My legs aren't working very well. I need to stand up. This is a problem with multiple sclerosis and my seat, which is a little bit buggered. I need to lift it up. There you go. Not very good at using my legs. I'm okay with gesticulating my upper body, but below the waist, oh man, my legs really struggle. Harry Morse, I have difficulty with communication. It turns out I don't, Harry, so I'll do it for you. Dude, I don't know how good I am at communicating, but I can talk. Like, it turns out that I've been banging on for 2 hours nonstop, and all it took was a bottle of Pinot Noir. I have difficulty with communication. I rely on you, JP, to teach me how to properly rant and communicate. Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Goose, I'm pro nationalization of natural monopolies like railway. See, I think we agree on probably more than we give ourselves credit for. So I agree with this. I think I'm absolutely, less so with, say, the car industry, although I don't have a problem with slight, like, French owning a little bit Renault or a little bit Stellantis, I think is probably a good thing. Not all of it, just a little bit. But in terms of things like water and power, that I think for the benefit of society hugely, I think that is important. I understand why monetarism and Thatcherism happened given the 70s, but we massively overcorrected. I agree with you, Goose, and thank you for that addition there. Agamergai, a gamer guy. This is what happens when you put it all. Oh man, how many times have I done this tonight? A gamer guy. I just got here late, so maybe this has been covered already. Are you and the rest of the community seeing a marked uptick in pro-Russian bots and misinformation in past days? I do see it go up and down. I saw it go down recently, and then about 3 days ago, I saw it go back up. And there's particularly with British politics. So as the budget came along in Britain, I don't know where you're from, mate, but in Britain, I was like, oh, Labour are not getting pasted. And then the budget came along and suddenly they're getting pasted. Now, some of that will be from genuine critics of the budget and real British people angry. But for sure, the bots and trolls were also huge around there. So it probably depends what country you're from and how that plays out. But yeah, the last few days I've seen it really, really tick up substantially. Nikki Owen, it's been fair to keep asking. Is it really fair to keep asking great questions? No, it isn't. Stop it, Nikki. All of you, stop it. I need to go to bed. Oh God, yeah, Cheryl, atpgo.com/donate. Please go and click on that and donate to our fantastic Gigaspor fundraiser, and that will be fantastic. Thank you. Rob Gannon, thanks for the forceful commentary. It's not ranting, it's forceful commentary, Rob, and you are looking dapper in that picture. Good on you. I can't remember the last time I wore a bow tie, and let alone a cummerbund. Get your point, but Thatcher effed the UK with oil. I don't necessarily disagree, the pirate. Thank you again. Just a few more, I promise, guys. Tom Marney, I don't think nationalisation is necessary. Good tax policy can accomplish the same thing and is necessary whether or not there's nationalisation. I think it depends what the domain is, so what the sector is. So I think there is a good call to nationalise. So, for example, in the UK, and this might be very UK centric, but we privatise our water, and at the moment, it turns out the best operating water companies in the UK are the ones that are still part nationalised, which I think the ones in Wales and in Scotland, correct me if I'm wrong, and the ones like Thames Water that are fully privatised have been an absolute freaking disaster. And there's a really good call to get our water companies renationalised, or at least partly renationalised. You can also argue that for rail as well, but you can also understand that some kind of private innovation in these industries and the to get a bit economic. You don't want X inefficiency and stuff from monopolies. So, some kind of hybrid approach is probably preferable. I will fix my username. Patrick, it is. Great thoughts on happiness and all. Really, thanks. Thank you, Patrick, or as I prefer to call you, user LH8RB5WX6Q. I think it rolls off the tongue far more. Is that Patrick Carlson? I wonder. Anyway, Patrick, if it is, thanks. And if it's not, thanks. It's been a long night. Pab Dutch, good to have you on board. Goose, honestly, let me go to bed, Goose. I'm rather left on a lot of things when it comes to the state, but I'm quite socially conservative. I want a state that's powerful in the areas that it makes sense because the profit incentive fails. I genuinely agree with that, actually. Again, Goose, can we stop agreeing? It makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. Yeah, although I am not socially conservative, I'm socially liberal. So I'm definitely socially liberal. Like, I don't really care about social stuff. It doesn't really affect me. You do what you want, whatever. But yeah, a bit all over the place economically, me. High taxes, poor but happy. Yeah, that could be it. Veronica Dahlqvist. Thank you, Veronica. Have you just changed? Like, that's the same picture, but now you change your name. Has that happened, or am I imagining things? But thank you, Veronica. Really appreciate that. Just a couple more. Papa Dutch, say good night, Jonathan. I'm trying to say good night. Good night. Good night, Jonathan. Nationalized trains, yes, but planes, no. I agree with that. Mitch Ashdown, all fair. You get me up in the morning, lol. Not personally, by the way. I don't go over to Canada and get Mitch up. He gets himself up. He has alarm clocks, I'm sure. Maybe a dog that barks at him. But I maybe my hits and losses video is a useful morning a part of people's lives, and for that I thank you all. Pirate. So ATP live from 20 hours from now on. I'm going to bed now. Honestly, I'm going to bed. Guys, thank you. I really appreciate it. Please remember to go to atpgeo.com/donate, as Cheryl has so kindly reminded us. And indeed, as Ozzy T says, take care, beautiful people. You are all wonderful. I really, really appreciate you. Thank you for allowing me to sound off about all sorts of different things. It has been a pleasure. The pleasure was all mine. And if you got any pleasure from it as well, then that's a double bonus. Awesome. Right. Good night. Take care. Sleep well, unless you're in, I don't know, Australia at the moment, in which case have a great day. And Slava Ukraini.